On November 19th, 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the heinous crimes that he had committed against his own family. But in the years since his conviction, new evidence has arisen that calls into question whether or not Watts acted alone after deeply disturbing information arose concerning his mistress, who had demonstrably lied to law enforcement from day one. And in today's video, I will show you the new information I have uncovered concerning his mistress, Nicole Kessinger, details that reveal a dark past that she successfully hid from everyone, including law enforcement. Because no matter what you may already know about her, there is far more to this story than what has already been told. In the months that followed August 13th, 2018, no one anticipated that Watts would pivot from his initial plan to proceed with the jury trial to then abruptly accepting a plea deal that spared his life from the death penalty. But to anyone paying attention, it would seem that the same man who was capable of committing such appalling acts while simultaneously lying through his teeth now appeared to be doing everything in his power to obscure the truth and to keep a secret that had cost the lives of his entire family. In today's video, I want to show you the overwhelming evidence that I have collected that I believe helps to answer the question, what was Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger trying so desperately to hide? I have completed a forensic evaluation of the discovery evidence, as well as the witness statements, audio recordings, and all available interviews. And it is my view that what I will show you today will help to provide a more clear understanding of why Chris Watts was so eager to accept the plea deal that slammed the door shut on law enforcement's investigation, including information about Nicole Kessinger's past that was hidden from everyone, details that should have been considered long before she became a protected and unvetted witness of law enforcement. And I believe that what I found throughout the 2,000 pages of discovery is evidence of Chris Watts' concentrated effort to hide the truth, to continue to mislead and lie to law enforcement, but not as a means to protect himself, but to protect someone else entirely. This is Into the Abyss, the Chris Watts Case, Episode 2. Now, before we begin, I have a brief but very important disclaimer that I need to say first. Number one, and most importantly of all, Chris Watts is exactly where he belongs. Nothing that I present in this video should in any way be seen as any kind of benefit, excuse, or reason for why he deserves any legal deference, consideration, or that he should be granted an appeal. On the contrary, it is my opinion that he is extremely fortunate that he did not receive a far more severe penalty for the truly despicable crimes that he perpetrated against his entire family. Number two, today's episode has one purpose: the pursuit and completion of justice. And it is my belief that there is a very simple reason why this case still matters, present day. Because if someone has evaded justice in connection with this case, what is to stop them from doing it again? And finally, this episode is based entirely on the available facts and the discovery evidence, specifically the records released by law enforcement in connection to the Watts case. This entire episode represents my opinion of that discovery evidence and is in no way an allegation or absolute statement of wrongdoing. My views are based solely on the evidence, views that were formed from my decades of prior legal experience, and I remain committed to analyzing this case with integrity and for one purpose alone: justice for Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico Watts. Because they are my reason for why I am advocating for the truth to come to light and nothing more. By the time Chris Watts left his first interrogation with Agent Graham Coder, law enforcement was already confident that Watts was responsible for the disappearance of his entire family. And even before they had confirmation, they believed that his motivations may have been linked to an extramarital affair. It was nearly midnight when Watts left the police department that Tuesday night, and I imagine that while he was shaken by the intensity of that first interview, a part of him still believed that he would be able to lie his way out of trouble. But time was not on his side, and less than 12 hours later, the deconstruction of Chris Watts' web of lies would begin, as law enforcement would methodically reveal the monstrous iceberg that he was hiding underneath a tsunami of lies that had surrounded every area of his life. After leaving the police department, he would spend that evening with friends and wake up the following morning to go pick up his father from the airport. Everyone that encountered him during that time noticed how strange he was acting, certainly not the way a father would after the supposed unexplained disappearance of his entire family. No one ever came forward to describe Chris as having shown any emotion or concern about the absence of his pregnant wife and children. In fact, his own father would go on to describe his affect at the airport and subsequent drive to the police department as quiet, subdued, and distant. By the time Chris Watts and his father arrived at the station, it was nearing noon, but law enforcement would waste no time and began their second and final interrogation that would lead to a stunning and horrifying confession. And what transpired over the next several hours would lead to a revelation that would uncover a cruel inhumanity that few could even begin to imagine. But earlier that same day, on Wednesday, August the 15th at 5 a.m., CBI agent Tammy Lee had received a call from Anadarko's security manager, Tony Husky. During their conversation, she was informed of a relationship between a contracted employee that had exchanged suggestive emails with their primary suspect. Agent Lee would eventually receive those emails from this possible new lead in their investigation. And written on those pages were two names, Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger. While Chris was sitting in the hot seat, failing miserably at his lie detector test, Nicole Kessinger had been in contact with law enforcement to confirm her connection to their case. And by the time that Chris would reveal the horrific nightmare that he had wrought against his own family, the FBI would step in to aid in their investigation, making contact with Kessinger to schedule their first of a half a dozen meetings that would occur over the next several weeks. The first meeting would take place at Majestic View Park in Arvada, Colorado. In attendance would be FBI agent Mark Lair, agent Philip Jones, Nicole Kessinger, and her father, Dwayne Kessinger. This would officially mark the first time that law enforcement would learn of the secret and torrid past of a man that was hiding more than the location of where he disposed his family, but a man who was hiding the truth concerning someone for whom he was willing to go to any lengths to protect, no matter how high the price or what it was about to cost him. Over the past 5 years, many people have asserted that the claims of Nicole Kessinger's involvement in this case is nothing short of a pointless fishing expedition. In fact, Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke went on the record stating, and I quote, "I have absolutely no reason to investigate Nicole Kessinger at this point in time. This is not a witch hunt," unquote.
She originally came forward and spoke to investigators on her own volition. Prior to the time, unfortunately, that she came in and spoke with investigators, she had deleted all of the information off of her phone that had any connection between her and Chris Watts. That hampered the investigation. That hampered our ability to get that electronic digital connection between the two. She was interviewed on multiple occasions. I believe that for the most part she was forthcoming in the course of those investigations. We don't have any reason to believe that she had any prior knowledge or involvement in the death of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. I think that's the best way I can answer that.
He would go on to completely dismiss all the claims that have been made about the problematic information that has arisen concerning her possible involvement. going on to claim that he had completed his job by securing the conviction against Chris Watts and that there was no interest whatsoever in any other investigation. You will want to keep that information at the forefront of your mind as we continue. So with that said, let's begin. FBI agent Laren Jones met with Nicole Kessinger and her father the evening of August 15th, 2018, virtually at the same time that Chris Watts was confessing. The urgency of the case had reached critical mass now that investigators understood that this was no longer a missing persons case. The collection of evidence, interviews of witnesses, and the subsequent forensic analysis began in haste, the sole purpose of which was to secure a conviction against Chris Watts. Now, it is critical to understand that before law enforcement ever met with Nicole Kessinger, they had already considered her a protected witness. And they gave her this protected status before they had any records, documentation, cell phone data, or anything whatsoever that could in any way definitively exclude her involvement in this crime. Before law enforcement had spoken to a single witness that could verify any of her stories, and before they received any evidence that could eliminate her as a suspect, they had already made up their minds to treat her as a protected asset in their investigation. It would seem that law enforcement had decided to completely sidestep the need to comprehensively verify that she was in fact blameless. And this was despite the fact that before they began this initial discussion, they would learn that Nicole Kessinger had already deleted vital material evidence from her phone that throughout the entire investigation would never be recovered. Evidence that I'm about to show you was critical to their quadruple homicide investigation. And having reviewed the discovery in its entirety, it is now obvious to me that from the very beginning of this initial interaction, that the FBI agents meeting with Kessinger and her father had no earthly idea who they were actually speaking to, the history that she was hiding from them, or why it even mattered. The first interview began after some initial pleasantries and started with Nicole describing how she met Watts and their initial discussions about his relationship with his wife Shanann, a name that Nicole will consistently and repeatedly refuse to say throughout half a dozen encounters with law enforcement, instead choosing to refer to her as that woman or her, or just about anything other than her actual name, Shanann. But right out of the gate, within the first 2 minutes of their discussion, Nicole Kessinger would tell her first of a multitude of lies.
That he was in the process of a separation from his wife, and as far as I knew, that was becoming pretty finalized.
Nicole is explaining to the FBI agents that she believed that Chris was in the final steps of a divorce that she thought pre-existed their involvement. Unfortunately for her, this story would go on to change many times over throughout the next few weeks and would not ring true when compared to her Google searches that completely contradicted this information. The most important of which being this search that she had conducted less than 3 weeks prior on July 24th, 2018. The search, "Man I'm having an affair with says he'll leave his wife," does not sound like someone who believes that Chris Watts' divorce was anywhere near being final, especially because this search happened several weeks after she says they started dating. But it's at the 2-minute mark of this conversation that I want you to listen very closely to the way that Kessinger describes her understanding of what happened on the day that Chris's family was initially reported missing. Specifically, the events surrounding her conversations with Chris throughout that day.
Monday afternoon, he told me that she was gone and he didn't know where she was. And at that point, I don't think that it set off any alarms in my head, just because, I have friends that I text, and if I don't hear from them for 3 hours or 6 hours or even a couple days, I don't feel concerned about where they're at because it's kind of a standard thing for me. But then she didn't come home that night. I was like, okay, well, maybe she'll come back. And I was kind of under the impression, since they're separating, that maybe she decided to take the kids. Maybe she decided to just leave for a few days. I don't know. I was just, I felt like maybe she was just trying to get some space. And I figured maybe that was why she left her stuff there, to just get some quiet.
Now, as we've plainly heard, Nicole has characterized what she understood happened to Chris's family on the day that they were reported missing. Nicole is very clearly telling the FBI that she was not in any way worried. And remember, at this moment in time, it has been less than 48 hours since these events took place. And we all just plainly heard Nicole tell the FBI agents that she wasn't alarmed concerning Shanann and the kids being missing on the 13th. She even explained that it's completely normal in her world for her friends and family to go hours or even days without communicating. There is absolutely nothing about her description of this entire day where she describes any concern, worry, fear, or alarm following Chris telling her that Shanann wasn't home. But you might be surprised to learn that exactly one day after this interview with the FBI, Nicole Kessinger will meet with an entirely different set of investigators, specifically CBI agent Kevin Kobach. And her story concerning the events of Monday, August the 13th will radically change once she learns that they are going to need her cell records. Now, initially, she repeats the claim that she wasn't really worried, parroting what she had said the day before. But I've noticed something now that I've studied Nicole Kessinger for the last month. She lies so often that she tends to forget her own lies and then goes on to completely contradict herself. But allow me to demonstrate.
What were you thinking at that time?
This was like on Monday. Again, at that point, I was like, I still thought she left. I mean, this was all on Monday. Like, I legitimately thought this woman left the premises with her kids and just wanted nothing to do with him for like 24 hours.
So his story was believable that she was pregnant from another man and maybe she took off for that guy, or...
He said several times, like, I think she just said that out of spite.
Okay.
Like, he thought she was with one of her friends.
So he held true to that story.
Pretty much.
She's just leaving and she's with a friend.
That was kind of what he thought. And that's kind of what he had me believing. And at the time, I wasn't really alarmed because it'd been like a half a day.
Sure.
Okay, so this is more or less what she said the day before. But let's listen to what she says 13 minutes later.
What did he say? Something like, please just think of and like I kept telling him I was scared. I was really freaking scared. In fact, that's another thing I miss. See, I'm so tired. Monday night, like, I called him back in the middle of the night because I could not sleep. I could not sleep at all. And I remember when I called him, he sounded like he was sleeping. And I was like, how the hell can you sleep right now? That's exactly what I said to him. And he was just like, I'm just kind of dozing off and on the couch. And I just remember thinking, like, I haven't shut my eyes yet. And this is not even my family. And so that happened on Monday night.
So I have a question. What in the world would she have to be scared of? She already said in this interview and in the interview the day prior that she wasn't worried or concerned at all. She even said that it didn't set off any alarms in her head. Now, I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, and I thought maybe she was confused or thinking about a different day until I learned what she said to Agent Kobach one day later during her third interview with law enforcement.
Yeah, well, all those phone calls at the very end of the night, that was me freaking out. Like, if you look at my text, a lot of that was like, I can't sleep, I'm really scared, where's your family? That was like me freaking out and him calling to like try to reassure me, or me calling him like, please talk to me, I'm super scared, where's your family? Like, those little ones at the very end of the night are me not being able to sleep and trying to get him to like talk to me about like and just, I guess, making sure everything was okay. So those like real late ones, and that's why they're all kind of like sporadic, because I'd be up for like an hour, and then I'd fall asleep for like 15 minutes, and then I would like wake up and start stressing again and try to call them back. Like, so that's why there are all these like little sporadic ones throughout the end of the night. But those two big ones.
Now, if I had been on the call, I would have asked, what are you super scared of, Nicole? Why in the world would you be freaking out when you just told us multiple times over the last 2 days that you were not at all concerned, that you didn't think anything of it? And now all of a sudden, you were completely panicked, freaking out, unable to sleep, and demanding that Chris calm you down. You were never previously concerned about his family being gone at any of the other times they weren't at his house, so why now? Especially when you consider that you have already told us that you weren't concerned. Nicole, your story doesn't make any sense. But I couldn't help but notice that during this third interview, before Nicole starts talking about how panicked and freaked out she was, that Agent Kobach brings up her phone records that law enforcement had just received by warrant. And Agent Kobach begins to tell Nicole that the records show that she spoke with Chris on Monday night for over 2 hours. So he asks her the logical question, what were they talking about? And despite her best efforts, she cannot seem to provide an answer that makes any sense whatsoever. She recalls that they talked about his kids' dirty bed sheets. She remembers what Chris was wearing, that he was quiet, but nothing substantive about their hours-long discussion on the same day that his entire family disappeared into thin air. And remember, we are only 2 minutes into her very first conversation with law enforcement, and already her web of lies is completely staggering. At the 5-minute mark of Nicole's conversation with the FBI, Agent Lair asks her if Chris ever said that he wanted a future with her. And her response? Well, just listen to what she says.
And then did he say anything to you about where he thought the relationship was going to be going, or what he was hoping for the future?
I think that he was looking for a relationship with me, but I knew that he was in the process of a separation. So for me, I was kind of having a hard time with that, where it's like, because he told me, oh, we're putting the house up for sale. And I told him, I'm not comfortable with considering you my significant other and vice versa while you are still, like, in the midst of a divorce.
It is hysterical the way she downplays the seriousness of her relationship with Chris Watts, which, by the way, she will later amend multiple times over to include all kinds of information that she is going to conveniently leave out during these first few interactions with law enforcement. And I suppose it's a coincidence that she's only vague about the relationship until she's essentially forced to provide them her cell phone records. And just wait till we start talking about the nightmare that is her cell phone records. But let me be clear, this woman who is going to downplay the gravity and intimacy of their relationship is the same woman who within the first few weeks of their relationship told Chris that she wanted to give him his first son, a woman who would spend 2 entire hours on August the 4th searching Google for wedding dresses, who then just 4 days later went back to Google and searched marrying your mistress. Oh, and this is the same person who on the 14th of July, after going to Chris's house and seeing pictures of Shanann, him, and the girls, became so angry and upset that she stormed out of his house, went into her vehicle, and threw a complete tantrum. A fight where she would essentially tell Chris that he needed to choose between her or Shanann. The following is from the typed excerpt that Nicole Kessinger provided to law enforcement on September 4th, 2018. Quote, I told him that I didn't think it was fair to Shanann or to me that he was trying to live 2 lives by being in a relationship with both of us at the same time. A conversation that we are supposed to believe was coincidentally just weeks before Chris would take out his entire family and, in his own words, did so just so that he could be with Nicole. The difference between what she told the FBI and the actual truth is vast. And just listen to what she says 15 minutes later in the very first conversation that she had with the FBI when Agent Lair inquires further about her relationship with Chris.
Were you in love with him?
I think it could have gotten there had things played out like in a decent manner.
These contradictions cannot be reconciled. And from my perspective, it looks like she intentionally misled investigators through every single interaction she had with them. Now, you might be tempted to think, well, this was her first interview with law enforcement, and maybe she didn't really want to tell them how serious it was. I mean, her father was standing right there. But let me be clear, I have forensically studied every single statement that Nicole Kessinger ever uttered, and her deception and lies continues all the way until the very last encounter with law enforcement. And the number of times that she demonstrably lies to law enforcement is absolutely staggering. But just in case you aren't yet convinced that she may have something to hide, keep watching, because I'm just getting started.
So when we spent time together, I didn't really go to his house. We would spend time at my house.
Just 7 minutes and 22 seconds into her first conversation with law enforcement, and Nicole Kessinger tells them that she didn't really go to Chris's house. And I'm sure by now you probably already know that that's a complete lie. And interestingly enough, 22 minutes into this same conversation, Agent Lair directly asks Nicole,
Were you ever at his house? Once. Okay.
Now, it's very important to remember that this conversation is happening on August 15, 2018. But the following day, after Nicole is told that they are going to need her cell phone records, she admits that she went to his house twice, on the 4th and on the 14th of July. And less than 3 weeks after this initial interview, she's going to provide law enforcement a detailed accounting of both of those times that she went to his house. She will go from barely being able to describe anything she did during her visits to his home to magically being able to remember in shocking detail what happened, what they discussed, what she saw, even specific details about his house, including the exact amount of his house payment. She'll even go on to regale them about intimate details concerning their sex life, arguments they had, and what she remembers seeing inside of his house, his mattress, his bed, and even what she ate. But in that moment in time, standing in Majestic View Park with the FBI, she confidently claims that she only went there once and then provides no additional information. And it's so important to remember that at this very moment, using Nicole's version of events, she knew that Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nika were in danger, and that any information that she could provide would have been vital in their investigation. So why in the world is she lying to them about something so significant? But hold on tight, because this is about to get much worse.
Was it just dinner? Did you go anyplace else? Visit any other?
No, we just went to dinner. That's one of the only times I've actually ever been out in public with him.
If what Nicole Kessinger just said wasn't real life and just some bad Lifetime movie on TV, I would venture to say that this person is one of the most pathological liars I have heard since Jodi Arias. Because we are 8 minutes and 16 seconds in this first interview, and we've encountered the fourth demonstrable lie. Because once again, that wasn't even close to one of the only times she went out in public with Chris Watts. In fact, just 6 days after this interview with the FBI, Detective Kobach calls Nicole Kessinger, but now he has her phone records from Verizon and he can guesstimate her location from her call records. And surprise, surprise, she now has detailed information, including dates, times, and exhaustive details about each time that they were out in public together. Her memory somehow works in reverse, where it drastically improves over time, and always right on the heels of law enforcement getting information about her that seems to prompt her to need to tell them the actual truth. Because once law enforcement has her cell records, she now seems to remember going to the Lazy Dog in the beginning of July with Chris. She remembers their very public trip to the Shelby Museum on the 14th of July, their trip to the races at Bandimere Speedway. Now, I might be losing it, but last time I checked, race car events are pretty public, aren't they? Oh yeah, and let's not forget their jaunt over to the Morrison Patio Bar, and then of course their very public trip to the sand dunes where their own pictures show people all around them. And then there was their multiple trips to the Oasis, which was like a convenience store that offered rentals for the sand dunes, but was in fact another very public place they were seen together. Oh, and then of course their clearly not private meal at BJ's restaurant. And by the way, this detailed disclosure didn't come until her fourth interaction with law enforcement. But what I found so incredibly interesting about it was how she was not only able to describe in alarming detail where they sat, what it looked like, what level they were on, the type of booth seating they were placed in, and even remembers how Chris paid for their meal. So I think we can all agree that going to the Lazy Dog on Saturday, August the 11th was not one of the only times that she went out in public with Chris Watts. And I just want to say this for my own sanity, because there are over 7 hours of audio recordings from Nicole Kessinger, and my notes just from the number of lies that I was able to definitively prove she told are over 50 pages long. And I couldn't help but ask a question that continually kept coming up, no matter how much I wanted to find any reasonable excuse for why she would lie about virtually every aspect of her involvement with Chris Watts. And that question is, what is Nicole Kessinger hiding?
I talked to him on Sunday night, and he was fine on Sunday night. I didn't have any issues with him.
This would be so easy to just skip right over and not see or understand the importance of this comment. But let's be clear, Nicole is very plainly telling the FBI that she talked to Chris on Sunday night and that he was fine, that she had no issues with him. But as usual, that story is about to drastically change when 6 days later she speaks to Agent Kobach. She now explains for over 10 minutes, going on and on about how she did have a problem with Chris on Sunday. Her story drastically changes from what she told the FBI to then saying that he told her that he was going to go straight out to the field on Monday morning, and now she thought that was exceedingly odd. 6 days after the initial interview with the FBI, she masterfully gaslights Agent Kobach by using all of this technical oil field jargon that is so far over his head that he cannot even comprehend what she's trying to say. In just 6 days, her story drastically changes from her not having a problem to us learning in the fourth interview that she apparently conducted the Spanish Inquisition with Chris, asking him multiple times over why he even needed to go to Survey 319 first thing in the morning. Now, I've noticed that whenever Nicole is about to tell a massive lie, she always precedes the revelation with some pointless, detailed exposition, like you're seeing now. But once she's finally done blathering on about this previously unknown discussion with Chris on Sunday, a discussion, by the way, that she denied was even necessary to the FBI, she finally drops the bomb on Agent Kobach. After she's completed her very effective gaslighting campaign, we learn that Nicole Kessinger texted Chris Watts on the same day that he disposed of his entire family at Survey 319 and asked him to send her a picture of the site, proving that he was there. Now, for those of you who haven't lived on Watts Island for the last 5 years, Survey 319 is the oil site where Chris disposed of his entire family. And Nicole Kessinger, on Monday night, hours after he had committed this disgusting crime, texted him and told him to prove that he was there. Over the years, I've heard people who adamantly defend Nicole Kessinger and law enforcement by making comments about how absurd it is that random lay people could possibly think that the true crime community could have any insights into this case. The implication being that all of these branches of law enforcement did their job and thoroughly vetted Nicole Kessinger. So then I have a question to those people. What do you think that Agent Kobach said after Nicole dropped the bomb that she told Chris to text her proof that he had been to the well where his family would later be found. Well, if you guessed nothing, then you win the grand prize, because after this unbelievable revelation, Agent Kobach had no hard-hitting follow-up questions. He just let her continue to dominate the entire conversation without ever calling her out for such an incredibly disturbing revelation. He never brings up the fact that she previously claimed that on Sunday he was fine and that she didn't have a problem with him. He just lets it go. And the sad reality is that Agent Kobach consistently and repeatedly failed to ask the follow-up questions that he should have asked when Nicole Kessinger was caught in a verifiable, monumental falsehood. Because if I had been on the call, this is what I would have said in that conversation. So hey, Nicole, I just have a few questions. Why would Chris need to prove to you that he went to Survey 319? And no offense, but the whole explanation you just gave doesn't make any sense at all, especially because during your very first person interview with us on August 16th, you told us this.
He's like, so I won't see you, I'm going to the field, which is not an uncommon thing for the ops guys to like just go straight to the field. Like, it happens. Like, typically they go to the office, I would say like 3 or 4 days a week, but there are days where him and his other team members are not there, or like I'll get in there and some days the cafeteria is packed and they're all there.
So it didn't cause you any concern that he said,
No.
I'm going to the field on Monday, I won't see you. That wasn't,
No,
that's
it
happened
didn't-
before.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it wasn't something, I mean, and it's not just him, it's like that whole team. Like, you can just tell when they've got like a lot going on, because I'll walk in and there'll be like 2 of them, as opposed to like 6 or 7.
But here we are, just 5 days later, and all of a sudden you have completely changed the entire narrative about what happened on Sunday night. And now you're saying, and I quote, I was like, why are you going to do that? That's not your job. Why would you have to go check the release? You're not part of the environmental team. And then in the evening you say, did you really go to the job site this morning? And who told you to go there? So despite having told us that you weren't at all concerned with Chris, now you are dramatically changing the story and recounting this lengthy discussion that you had with Chris about why you needed him to send you pictures that proved that he was at Survey 319 that morning. A location that just happened to be where Chris disposed of the bodies of his entire family. And I noticed that you didn't ask him to prove where he was when he went to Survey 1029 or Survey 1129 later that same morning. So why would he need to prove to you that he was at Survey 319 and not any of the other places he was at that same morning? Explain it to me, Nicole. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. Because you expect me to believe that out of all of the text messages that he's ever sent to you, which not one of them do we ever see any evidence that you're asking for proof of where he worked that day. And you said yourself that it isn't uncommon for people to go out into the field before work. But for some strange reason, the one day that he goes out to the well that just happens to be the same location of a crime scene for a quadruple homicide, you want us to believe that this is a coincidence. Do I have that right, Nicole? Oh yeah, and that just happens to be the same day that you are panicked, freaked out, unable to sleep, and demanding that Chris help calm you down. But you know, I have kind of an important question. Why do your stories and recollections seem to become so much clearer now that law enforcement has your iPhone 6 and just told you that they are going to extract all of the information from it? We are 12 minutes and 35 seconds into the very first interview that Nicole Kessinger ever had with law enforcement, and the Weld County District Attorney says there is no reason to investigate Nicole Kessinger. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't a hindsight is 2020 situation because Agent Kobach had no reason whatsoever not to fully vet every single thing that Nicole was telling him. And law enforcement as a whole had no reason to make her a protected witness before they knew with certainty that she had nothing to do with influencing, encouraging, or participating in this crime. There is absolutely no excuse for why investigators responsible for this case failed to call Nicole Kessinger out for any one of the dozens of lies that she told them over the course of just a few weeks. And I want to prove to you that they were showing her a disproportionate amount of understanding and subjectivity while failing to vet any of her complete fabrications. On October 16, 2018, Detective Dave Baumhover contacted David Colon, a friend of Chris Watts, concerning a letter that he had sent to Chris at the Weld County Jail. The letter was intercepted by law enforcement, and DA investigator Dan Boyle was given the letter for further analysis. Upon reading it, he developed concerns about what Colon had written, so concerned that he contacted Detective Dave Baumhover and asked him to call Mr. Colon and to question him concerning the letter. In this supplemental report from the Discovery, we can plainly see that Detective Baumhover contacted Mr. Colon and questioned him concerning his inconsistent statements because he made a comment about Shanann being overbearing. It was the DA's opinion that in Mr. Colon's initial statement, he never made any such comment about Shanann, and they were so concerned about his changing story that they called him to discuss what they perceived was an inconsistency. Now, I want to emphasize the importance of this interaction that David Colon had with law enforcement. He writes a letter to Chris Watts, and all he does is make a passing comment about Shanann, and law enforcement pounces on the letter and him, wasting no time to call him and demand that he explain himself. And I'll be honest, that is fascinating to me. They noticed the most minuscule change in an inconsequential witness's story, but Nicole Kessinger, who would have been a star witness at the Chris Watts jury trial, changes her story near constantly, and they don't bat an eye. In fact, through the various interactions that Agent Kobach had with Nicole, he makes excuses for her. But hold on, because this isn't the only time that they went after potential witnesses concerning the veracity of their stories. On August 29, 2018, Agent Tammy Lee was contacted by Trent Bolt. Bolt was a man who claimed to have been in an intimate relationship with Chris Watts in the year preceding his crimes. But it's in this interview with Agent Graham Coder and Tammy Lee that we witness one of the most aggressive interrogations of a potential witness that ever occurs throughout this entire case. Bolt is challenged on every claim, every statement, or even any minor alteration to his account. And whenever Bolt's story doesn't match up, he is outright called a liar. So it's a little strange to me that Nicole Kessinger is allowed to literally alter her story at every new interaction with law enforcement, tripping herself up in her own web of uncontestable lies, and no one ever bothers to call her out on them. And I could pick apart all 7 hours of her audio recordings this way because they are all the same. In fact, I was unable to go 5 minutes in any direction without coming across a statement, a discussion, or a claim that didn't contain a foundationally obvious lie. And if that isn't extremely concerning to you, do me a favor. Start this video over because I don't think you've been paying attention. But let's continue.
He texted me and told me something along the lines of, like, my wife and my kids aren't home. And I was just like, okay. And then
that was on Monday.
It was on Monday.
Do you know what time it was?
Honestly, I'm kind of upset with him right now. Just disappointed with him. So
Did you catch that? Nicole realizes that she can't answer FBI agent Lair's question because she has already deleted all of her text messages, and she nearly blurts that out when she realizes how bad it's going to sound that in the first 13 minutes of their discussion that she's already admitting to destroying material evidence in a quadruple homicide. So she pivots the conversation to say that she's upset with Chris, which has absolutely nothing to do with the question that she was just asked. But she's bringing it up because of the fact that her supposed anger with him will become the foundation of her laughable excuse for why she deleted everything off of her phone. Honestly, how did anyone ever buy this BS? Because the sad reality of this investigation is that no one in law enforcement ever gave her any considerable pushback concerning her choice to destroy material evidence. Oh, and by the way, she didn't just delete all of her text messages. She deleted all of her pictures, her contacts, emails, and anything else that had anything to do with Chris. And she didn't just erase all signs of Chris from her phone and leave it there, because she also told Chris on August 14th to follow suit and delete everything off of his phone too.
And then, so Tuesday, after that conversation, I told him, I told him to delete his text because I knew he was like going crazy texting me.
And then, for some strange reason that we are supposed to believe is not at all concerning and is just a coincidence, her best friend Charlotte also deleted her entire conversation history with Nicole. A conversation that included a picture that she sent of Chris, as well as a discussion about him. There is no logical explanation for why she chose to delete vital records that was and still is evidence in that investigation, especially because of when she deleted them. On August 14th, 2018, Nicole was already well aware of law enforcement's investigation into what was a direly urgent missing persons case at that moment in time. Chris had already informed Nicole that his entire family was gone. She knew that she had important evidence from him on her phone that would show detailed information about his whereabouts that morning, especially in light of the Prove It text messages and screenshots he sent from Survey 319 on Monday night. At 12:08 p.m. on Tuesday, August 14th, 2018, Nicole Kessinger spent nearly 4 entire hours searching Google for stories related to Chris, Shanann, and news accounts concerning Shanann's disappearance. Nicole would eventually leave work early, and at 5 p.m., she would begin searching Google again, but this time for something far more specific. This just happens to be the same day that Nicole deletes all of her cell phone records, text messages, and pictures related to Chris, and then tries to destroy her SIM card. No reasonable person would see those Google searches and come to the conclusion that there wasn't a concerted effort to hide something from law enforcement, because I again would like to remind you that Nicole was already well aware of the gravity of this situation, and instead of preserving evidence that she knew law enforcement would need, she chose to delete all of it. Which is why during Nicole's second interview with Agent Kobach, when the issue of her deleting all of her phone records came up, I was very interested to see how he would handle such a problematic issue.
What did that cause you to do with your phone, though?
Oh, what? When I deleted those? I was just kind of grossed out by him, to be honest with you. I was just like, I don't know what's going on right now, but you just lied to me, and I don't want to see this come over my phone anymore. So I removed it.
The information was not destroyed because there was anything in there that would be harmful to you or potentially to Chris at this point, but harmful to you in particular. That's not why you did it.
No.
You did it out of...
But instead of asking her to explain her actions, asking probing questions, he makes excuses for her, lobbing an underhanded softball by telling her what to say so that her deletion of these vital records doesn't appear incriminating. Legally speaking, do you know what kind of crime deleting text messages is in relation to a homicide investigation? It's called obstruction of justice. It's called destruction of evidence, all of which are crimes. And yet for some reason, from the moment that Nicole Kessinger contacted law enforcement, they considered her a protected witness long before they knew if she had any involvement in the crime. And their bias towards her is something that you can see throughout the entirety of the discovery file. And evidence of that bias is everywhere, even in their own narrative that you can see within the court-ordered records requests. Part of the legal process whenever law enforcement needs to obtain records from a cell phone provider is to issue a court-ordered request for production of records. The request itself is often an affidavit that outlines the legal basis for why the court order was granted by a municipal judge. And in their affidavit is a foundational lie that I simply cannot wrap my mind around. As you can see in their court order request for records, law enforcement is providing the cell phone company their affidavit and description of the events. Now pause the video, and in the comments section, you tell me what's wrong with this sentence. Quote, "The affair was only discovered after Kessinger contacted your affiant, stating that she had information regarding this investigation." Unquote. Did you catch it? Do you remember what we covered earlier in this video? Because on August 15th, 2018, law enforcement was contacted by Anadarko's security manager, Tony Husky, at 5 a.m. to inform them of the relationship between Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger. Now, over the years, I've worked for several major corporations, and typically, when your company has notified law enforcement of your casual connection to a major crime, the internal HR, legal department, or some other agent of the company will contact you to tell you what has transpired. Because wouldn't you know it, several hours after Tony Husky contacted law enforcement, Nicole Kessinger would reach out to law enforcement for the very first time. So the affair wasn't at all only discovered when she contacted them. So their entire narrative is based in a foundational misrepresentation of the facts. And there's a very important reason why I'm pointing this out. Because throughout this entire discovery packet, all I see is law enforcement, and especially Agent Kobach, doing virtually everything in their power to ignore the innumerable times that she misled them, objectively lied to them, and then they make excuses for her despite the credible reasons that they had to investigate her as a viable suspect. But there is still something very important that we need to discuss concerning Nicole Kessinger's questionable relationship to this crime and just how much law enforcement knew or should have known that there was a problem. On October 30th, 2018, Detective Michael Prill sent his infamous supplemental narrative that included a detailed report of the forensic data that they had extracted from Chris, Shanann, and Nicole's cell phones. The report was sent to the Weld County District Attorney's Office, and within that forensic analysis of the data was important information that has often been completely overlooked. In the report, he explains that during his review of the data extracted from Chris, Shanann, and Nicole's cell phones, that he learned vital information. Quote, Northern Colorado Forensic Laboratory did not possess the technology needed to perform physical data extractions from Apple devices. The extracted data is not inclusive of all data stored amongst the assorted applications within a given device. Unquote. Allow me to explain how important that statement is to this case. One of the primary defenses that I've heard from the various people who have defended Nicole Kessinger claim that law enforcement proved that she had no involvement whatsoever in these crimes, that law enforcement obtained evidence that demonstrated that she was not at all involved. But I believe that I can prove that the data they received could not have possibly been able to prove what they claim it did. In Detective Prill's report, he very plainly admits that the forensic laboratory did not have the ability to extract the data they needed, and that even if they had extracted it, it would not include the individual applications on each of their phones. So I took the time to look at what law enforcement requested from Nicole Kessinger's cell phone provider, and here's what I found. What you are seeing are the record requests that law enforcement sent to Verizon. In this court order, you can plainly see that they requested Nicole's subscriber records, equipment records, call, text, and data records, stored communication, and RTT record reports. Now, all of this sounds perfectly boring, but here's why this is important. Because out of the data that they requested, none of that provides a detailed GPS accounting for Nicole Kessinger's whereabouts. And for whatever reason that I simply cannot wrap my mind around, this forensic department dropped the ball in spectacular fashion by failing to use any of the available software that they had access to that could have extracted all of her GPS information, deleted text messages, pictures, and so much more. The amount of information that you can extract from an iPhone, even back in 2018, would absolutely blow your mind. Your cell phone knows when you stand up, when you sit down. It knows the direction it's facing. It records when it's opened and for how long, what apps you use, the duration, time, and a competent, technologically savvy forensic department can easily extract all of the data off your cell phone. including whatever you may be trying to hide in connection to a criminal investigation. And the sad reality is that law enforcement never retrieved the hundreds, if not thousands, of missing text messages, pictures, and videos that Nicole Kessinger deleted. And the following is one of the most important parts of Detective Prill's report. Listen very closely. I'm certain Watts communicated far more with Kessinger than what is reflected in his phone data, perhaps facilitated through the secret calculator application. It became apparent he was receiving assorted nude images of Kessinger that she was taking by herself and sending to Watts, which he then stashed in that application to prevent Shanann from ever seeing them. This report is quite literally telling us that law enforcement themselves, just 1 week before their investigation ended, did not know where Nicole and Chris were communicating, primarily because both of their phones have incoming pictures that were not coming through their text message application. So I started digging through the discovery records, and when I found it, I almost couldn't believe what I was reading. Throughout all of Nicole Kessinger's interactions with law enforcement, she was asked numerous times if she ever communicated with Chris using any other applications on her phone. And no matter who asked the question, she never once wavered from the statement that she never communicated with Chris through anything other than text messages and phone calls.
So all his photos were sent. There was no apps or anything else you used that you guys were sending. It was all just text messages.
Yeah,
Okay. So it'd be an attachment to a text that he sent you.
pretty much.
But
Everything is in the text and the phone call records.
But on August 17th, 2018, in the middle of one of her many nonsensical rants, Nicole craps the bed, putting her foot in her own mouth, accidentally telling Agent Kobach that she had spoken with Chris over Skype. And what do you think Agent Kobach said when she made this accidental, monumental admission? I'll take failing to do your job for 1,000, Alex. Because once again, if you guessed absolutely nothing at all, then you guessed correctly. Now, I really want to stress how important of a mistake this is. Nicole just told Agent Kobach that she communicated with Chris on an app that she has already said multiple times that she never did, and Agent Kobach has nothing to say? Now, I just happen to be very technologically proficient, so I am very familiar with how cell phone applications work, specifically Skype. You can use Skype to not only make phone calls, but it is also used to send text messages. So I have a question. Where are Chris and Nicole's Skype records? Because a material primary witness in a quadruple homicide tells you that she communicated with your primary suspect on an application that she previously denied ever using, and you aren't even remotely interested in finding out the nature and extent of that communication? Well, strap in, sister, because this janky neighborhood carnival ride is about to go right off the rails entirely. Do you know what other apps Chris Watts used on his cell phone? Snapchat. And if you know anything about how Snapchat works, then you likely already know that it is also an app that you can send pictures and messages that very conveniently auto-delete themselves. You know, the kind of application that you could send pictures that could end up in your camera roll that would explain where these pictures were coming from, that kind of an app. Oh, and look, right here in the discovery file is proof that Chris was using Snapchat on July 20th, 2018, several weeks before he would commit his crimes. So again, simple question, where are the records? Where are the Snapchat records? Because if it isn't already completely evident, none of these were requested at any point. And when you have Detective Prill telling you that he is certain that your primary suspect was communicating with Nicole, your protected witness, outside of iMessage, something that she claimed she never did, then why in the world would you not do everything in your power to ensure that you find where they were communicating from? But I want to go back to the records that law enforcement requested from Nicole Kessinger's cell phone provider, because again, I want to show you that what law enforcement requested from Verizon did not provide the detailed GPS data that so many people seem to think they received. As previously mentioned, one of the only things law enforcement would have received from Verizon that could have been used to track Nicole's location history were the RTT reports. Now, an RTT report stands for Real-Time Tool, and let's read together exactly what this information from Verizon would provide law enforcement. The Real-Time Tool report are derived solely from round-trip delay measurements. They are best estimates and are not related to any GPS measurement. But all measurements contained on this report are the best estimates available rather than precise location. As we can see in this picture, and as it states, the target phone can be found anywhere along the arc. It is important to remember that the information is never exact. So we can plainly see that law enforcement could not have been able to obtain detailed GPS location information that would have in any way definitively proved where Nicole was without a massive margin of error. Which leads me to my next big problem, because I have taken the time to read every word of the entire discovery packet, and I don't see any evidence that law enforcement verified when Nicole Kessinger arrived to work on August 13th, 2018. Apparently, there are some claims that have been made that law enforcement was able to speak with some of her coworkers that supported her morning arrival. So then where is her time card? You know, the one that Nicole discussed in the very first interview with the FBI and then mentions again during her second interview?
And I clocked out at 3 is what my time card says. That's what I was showing Mark the other day.
Isn't that interesting how she only mentions her clock out time but not her clock in time? I wonder why that is. Because here's an interesting fact. Anadarko has 400 security cameras, nearly 200 of which are outside in their parking lot, cameras that span the entirety of their massive facility. Law enforcement could have easily checked those security feeds and proved when she arrived that morning. And by now, they could have easily provided a timestamp screenshot to the public that would have definitively proved her arrival on the morning of August 13th. Now, you might be wondering why that even matters. Well, again, for those of you who already have a beachfront villa on Watts Island, you already know the answer. And that's why in episode 3 of this series, being released 2 weeks from today, I am going to break down all of Nicole Kessinger's movements based solely on the discovery, as well as her phone record history, and show you what it reveals. Because on the morning of August 13th, 2018 at 6:16 a.m., Nicole Kessinger's phone pinged in Frederick, Colorado, near the home of Chris Watts. Something that to this day, law enforcement has never been able to explain or account for. Since I began my research on the Watts case, I was able to conduct my own independent investigation into Nicole Kessinger, and what I found in the publicly available court records revealed that she was arrested on December 9th, 2006. You will notice that the arrest was for underage possession and consumption of alcohol, certainly not the crime of the century. But what I thought was incredibly odd was that this was her second offense. And at the time, she was only 19 years old. But somehow, even though she had already received her second charge for underage drinking, her case was completely dismissed. Now, I have been in contact with an anonymous source who provided additional information that I was able to use to locate this record. You'll probably notice that the spelling of Nicole is entirely different, but the date of birth and the middle name are the same. Furthermore, this is an adjacent county, but you can see in the charges that Nicole is spelled with an O-L-E. But this time she was charged with driving without a license and another alcohol-related offense. And again, this is the second charge in just that county at the age of 19 years old. And wouldn't you know it, this case just goes away too, with no mention of probation or jail time. And no matter how you read this, somehow Nicole Kessinger appears to commit several crimes and then walks away from it without any repercussions whatsoever. I can't put my finger on it, but that kind of sounds familiar. Huh. But I suppose it's starting to make a lot more sense why her father was present for her first 2 interviews, because it would seem that he had already been through this a time or 2 or 12. But do you know what I find to be very disturbing about all of this information? Is that little more than a decade after these crimes, she would go on to become the mistress of a prolific family killer. A woman who seems to have a history of using multiple names and aliases, who is somehow able to get arrested multiple times and walk free every time of any responsibility or even probation. And what's even more hard for me to wrap my mind around is that law enforcement on August 15, 2018 requested her criminal background, which means they had every reason to approach their star witness with a certain level of caution. They had an obligation to ensure that they were going out of their way to verify her statements. Because if they had this information, did it not occur to anyone that someone with a history of criminal conduct might possibly have something to hide? Because Nicole's past criminal history was going to come up through the inevitable background check that any good defense lawyer would have conducted prior to a jury trial. Which is why the next few things you're about to learn is nothing less than shocking. During my investigation, I received credible information concerning Nicole's prior history. But I do want to be very clear. These are allegations that cannot be verified absent of the primary parties coming forward. And this is due to the fact that they allegedly occurred while Nicole was still a minor. But the allegations involve Nicole allegedly committing a violent crime with a knife when she was only 16 years old. A crime that once again she was allegedly arrested for, but was again dismissed. Unfortunately, because she was a minor at the time, that means that the court records would be sealed. But the information that I received from this source had first-hand knowledge of the event. And while I cannot definitively confirm this information with court records, I was, however, able to find this public statement concerning the alleged encounter. And it's because of my knowledge of her criminal history that I found Detective Michael Prill's report especially intriguing, because it was the very first time any law enforcement agent associated with the Chris Watts investigation had written such unfavorable details that directly implicated Nicole Kessinger. Detective Prill's report exposed Nicole for having profusely lied to law enforcement. It revealed her damning Google searches, her clear obsession with Chris, her repeated and ongoing rendezvous with him, and a multitude of information that completely contradicted her entire narrative that she had been telling since day one. But even worse, the report showed evidence that there was now someone within law enforcement that had started to suspect that Nicole Kessinger was hiding something, and he made that suspicion clear throughout his entire report. Detective Prill's report was issued on Tuesday, October 30th, 2018, and a copy was sent to the Weld County District Attorney's Office. From that moment, the report became a ticking time bomb that information would explode upon reading, but only in the hands of its final recipient. And I believe that what happened in the days and hours following the publishing of that report that completely altered the entire trajectory of the Chris Watts case for good. In the criminal justice system, discovery is often issued in triplicate: a copy for the clerk, a copy for the judge, and a copy for the defense. Due to the requirements of mandatory disclosure rules, all supplemental reports, including this one, are required to be shared with defense counsel. And it's commonplace that once defense counsel receives any new discovery, that a copy of that discovery is then shared with the defendant. It's my experience that this process usually takes a few days to get from the hands of the district attorney to the court, from the court to defense counsel, from defense counsel to the jail, and then finally into the hands of the defendant, Chris Watts. I would venture a guess that by Friday the 2nd of November, Chris Watts likely received a copy of this report. The report was brought to his cell, where he opened it and then carefully and methodically read each page. I imagine that he felt the same panic that we all witnessed from him as he stood there watching his neighbor's security camera footage the afternoon of August 13th, 2018. I envisioned that as he read Detective Prill's notes, he realized that someone within law enforcement was no longer buying the mountain of BS that Nicole had been selling the entire time. And that he realized someone had finally been able to see through the murky lies that Nicole had so carelessly spun over those many weeks. And I imagine that after he read that report, he knew exactly what he needed to do, the only thing for a coward like him left to do. Because exactly 1 week after Detective Prill's report was issued, Chris Watts accepted a plea deal that would completely stop the investigation into his horrific crimes. An act that he knew would slam the door shut on law enforcement's investigation and end any further need for Nicole Kessinger to continue to lie. Reading through the discovery of this case was not easy. Now, while I have learned how to deal with reading through autopsy reports and statements that are incredibly difficult to comprehend as a father, for me, the most impactful part of the entire discovery file was Detective Michael Prill's data report. Throughout the entire analysis, you could tell that he was deeply perturbed by Nicole's actions. He went out of his way to describe Nicole's disturbing and creepy affect, never failing to point out how off-putting her voicemails were. Throughout the entire report, you can see his clear efforts to try and bring attention to the problems that he saw within the records, going out of his way to write detailed notations concerning Nicole's deletion of critical evidence. But it was what he wrote concerning his review of Shanann's text messages that absolutely broke my heart. And what he wrote is my inspiration and reason for why I wanted to bring these issues to light. Because Shanann was so much more than the wife of Chris Watts. She was Cece, Bella, and Nico's mother. And everyone who knew her said that she was the best mother any child could ever want.
Boy, play, girls, win.
You're so smart.
My turn.
What's yours say, Cece? Diva,
Diva,
princess,
Princess,
mini boss,
Nicholas,
rock star,
Star,
multitask.
Dinosaur.
Good job.
She was a daughter, a sister, and a beacon of love, light, and joy to her hundreds of friends and family who love, admire, and miss her dearly. And it's why when I read these words, I sat at my desk and just broke down. As news broke of his confession and arrest, Shanann's phone received desperate messages from friends and loved ones like Addie. I need you here. I want you to know you were literally my right hand, and I can't do this without you. The loss of Shanann and her children was something that so many of us felt and grieved because we could see ourselves in the eyes of the Rooschecks as they poured their hearts out during sentencing. And it's why the truth still matters in this case, now more than ever. Because while we can't bring back Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico, we can honor them and remind the world that on the 5-year anniversary of their passing, they will be remembered, and we will honor them as we continue to advocate for justice. In closing, I want to express my gratitude to you, the viewer, for allowing me the opportunity to share with you why I believe these issues are still so important today. Your willingness to listen and to watch this video all the way to the end is such a powerful way for you to support this channel. Because at the heart of everything I do is the desire to passionately advocate for the victims, their families, and to remind people that they deserve justice no matter how much time has passed. So again, thank you so much for your support today. One of the most important tools that you have as a viewer to help spread awareness about these issues is to interact with the video. It may seem trivial, but when you like, comment, and share this video, it helps to propel it forward so that even more people will have the opportunity to see it. So please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because 2 weeks from today, I am releasing the 3rd installment of this series, as well as premiering the Andrea Yates case. Multiple new series will be coming over the next several weeks, so hit the subscribe button so that you can receive early notifications for when all new content goes live. Now I want to thank our Patreon and YouTube supporters of the channel. Our supporters are quite literally the backbone of this entire community. Due to YouTube guidelines, most, if not all, of the content within the true crime genre is demonetized or restricted. As a result of that, this often means that creators like myself are restricted from earnings that help to support the hundreds and thousands of hours that it takes to create this content. So it is because of each of our Patreon and YouTube supporters that I am able to create this content, and I simply cannot thank you enough for that support. And also I want to give a special thank you to our producers Hazel C, Florentino M, and Mr. Merman Prince, which is an amazing name. Also, I would like to formally announce that on August 15th, I will be featuring the first episode of the Behind Criminal Minds podcast that will be available on all podcast platforms. Each episode will be a free-form analysis of the various cases that I've discussed on this channel, as well as cases suggested by our community. Additionally, each of you have the opportunity to suggest future podcast episodes by interacting with our community poll that will allow our subscribers to determine future episodes. So stay tuned, because it will be a series that you won't want to miss. Finally, thank you again for your time and for being a part of this community. But before I go, I have one final important request. At some point in your day, take a moment to reach out to someone in your life that is important to you and remind them that you love them. Because if I've learned anything about life through these cases, it's that it's short, and we have to take every opportunity to cherish it. So take a moment, reach out to a friend or family member, or even a perfect stranger, and remind them that they matter and how much you care. But as always, this has been Behind Criminal Minds. We'll see you next time.